Hi there, and welcome to Social Capital Matters. I'm your host, Kylie Taylor. On this show, we take a deep dive into the ideas around social capital by talking to business and industry leaders about how they use it to inspire their stakeholders and build a framework for long-term success. Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of Social Capital Matters. We have a great show for you this week, but first I'm joined by our producer Greg in Bangkok. Greg, how are you doing today?
Hi Kylie, I am doing fine. I'm enjoying the winter weather here in Bangkok, which means it's about 24 degrees and I'm a little bit cold, but I'm ready to go. So let's meet our guest for this episode.
Absolutely. Today we are talking to Delhi-based Rachna Sharma. She is the founder and CEO of Climate Ready Leaders. What's that about? So Rachna says that the climate crisis is a communications crisis, and she wants to do something about that. So let's get right into it and learn more about what she's doing. Hi, Rachna. Welcome to Social Capital Matters. It's a real pleasure to talk to you today. But before we get started, why don't you just tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Hi, Kylie. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for inviting me. As a background, I'm a communicator by background. I've spent over 2 decades working across India and Asia. I started my career in the development sector. I moved to the corporate and agency world, and I spent 15 years in Indonesia working with the clients across Southeast Asia, working on a lot of sustainability and development mandates. And now I have come to the climate space, just extending that.
Well, I'm glad you have, because we've got some really big problems to solve. It feels like we are miles off reaching global climate targets. Everywhere you look in business today, it is the number one topic of conversation. Where are the climate targets at? How are we going to help meet those targets? And how are we measuring them and how are we reporting them? This is spurring a lot of shareholder activism. It's spurring even legal cases where in the US and in New Zealand, for example, people have taken governments and companies to court over climate damage. So this is really a very hot space and something we all need to understand. Now, you're one of the people that have tried to come up with a solution to all this and play a big role in all this. Most people don't know where to start. People don't understand the science or the nuance of climate change or how it's relevant to them. You saw this lack of knowledge or understanding as one of the key barriers limiting support for the battle against climate change, leading you to focus on creating greater knowledge. I like what you're doing around creating climate-ready leaders. I think it's a really unique approach. I'd love you to tell us more about it and how you came to it.
I was there once, I didn't know enough about climate change, and it's something around the pandemic. It was sort of a wake-up call, and I'd immersed myself into the climate conversations and just trying to understand it better. And I realized, how the low carbon transition is going to be very hugely transformative for our world. And it's much like the internet. I see it as transformative as the internet. And you mentioned, climate is a very huge financial risk for the global economy. And pressure is building on businesses, from several quarters. So there's investors, and regulators. They're demanding, businesses start disclosing and managing climate risk. Whether it's communities, whether it's employees who are very concerned, whether it's customers, everybody is looking at businesses, and demanding businesses become more climate responsive, and this will really intensify, as the climate risks worsen. So the attention businesses are getting and the pressure they're getting will just keep on increasing. So climate problems and sustainability solutions, as I learned on my journey, they're very, very closely connected. And climate is also the biggest business opportunity, much like the internet, So, imagine what the internet was, 30 years ago, and, people who understood the opportunity around that risk, and with something similar with the climate as well. And I saw very little awareness around this, and, I thought there was a great need to bring more awareness for this for businesses so they could step up action And that really led to, setting up of climate ready leaders. And our aim is to, demystify climate and, embed sustainability into teams and organizations. So that was the journey. And then for communicators, particularly because I'm one, I saw the climate crisis as a communications crisis. It's just not been communicated well so far. And the positive, constructive narrative on, it's how it can be solved, I see is mostly missing. So anyone creating content, whether it's marketeers or communicators, digital folks, they all play a very important role in setting that narrative and, facilitating the sustainability journey. So I wanted to address that area as well. And, we set up also a storytellers program that we have as part of our offering.
Rachna, how do you get people interested, though, who are just not interested? If people are just denying climate science or not realizing what a risk it is, how do you actually preach to the unconverted and get them interested?
So, everyone I meet, there's nobody I have met, who said that this is not the right thing to do, so it's important and everybody realizes as much, but it's about how do you get them to, take action. And one thing we learned, much as everyone wants the greater good, people are tackling very immediate challenges, so the business issues are really immediate and we speak to those, so it is less about, saving the world or, creating bigger impact. It's more about saving the business. There's a huge risk, to businesses I was talking about, and solving climate and going sustainable is good business, So our conversations are really about, the benefits and opportunities, of the climate shift, and more importantly about very actionable and practical solutions, because I think that conversation has also been missing. So that's one side of it. And then, when we speak to, businesses and corporates, every business is at a certain point in their climate and sustainability journey. So some are just starting, out, some are further along. So the conversations need to be very specific to the business and the stage they're in, So a company with a very clear sustainability plan, for example, will have different learning needs compared to one that is, just contemplating starting. So that's one thing. Then the sectors of business also matter, so a food company versus a transport versus an energy, each company has, very specific learning requirements, because the sectoral transition on low carbon that's happening is unique to, to each sector in several ways. And then it's also about, the levels within the company. So are we speaking, to the leadership team that needs, more learning? Is it, more about general, employee learning that, they're looking at? So each level has a specific requirement, and we look at that. And then for agencies and consultancies, it's very different from what it would be for a corporate or, what a non-profit needs on, climate learning. So with the agencies, it's more about understanding the shift that your clients are going through, and, what does this mean for your business?
The World Economic Forum Global Risk Report ranked climate change related risks at 7 of the top 10 risks for global GDP. So I totally agree what you said. This is a real business issue, right? There's real economic impacts. But at the same time, a 2023 PwC survey found that only 19% of CEOs think that climate change is a serious risk to their business. I found that number really staggering, and it's actually lower than the 2022 figure. Clearly, the organizations that you're working with are the ones that know that they need to do something about it. Have you come across anyone who just you couldn't convince that this was an important driver in their business?
Oh, yes. Those conversations happen all the time. So there are leaders, who understand. There are some who question whether, the ESG debate actually, which is raged particularly in the US, it's led a lot of doubts, in people's minds that is it even real, So there's a lot of misinformation around there, but the way I see it, it's climate is going to have the last word. It's the science tells us, that it's happening, and it's just having the information gap again, the knowledge gap. I think is quite critical. That is not letting people understand the enormity of the shift happening.
Well, I mean, we have to talk about greenwashing. As communicators, as two people who've built their entire career as communicators, we have to address this area of greenwashing because it's a problem that we're all looking at it. I know that, right across our client base, no one wants to be involved in greenwashing. None of our clients want to be greenwashers, and they want to be incredibly careful about what they're doing. But they do struggle with knowing exactly what they can say, how far they can go, what their stakeholders expect of them. Some organizations that I've come across are so concerned about this area, it actually leads to them sort of closing down and not wanting to communicate at all. And they think it's better just to say nothing. And I don't think that's probably the right way to go. And you talked about the role of advertising and communications people in being communicating about climate. There's also been a lot of criticism that ad agency people, communications people, people like you and me, risk jumping on the bandwagon and not understanding the fundamentals and actually end up creating greenwashing. Do you have some sort of clear guidelines or suggestions or tips that you give people or communicators to help them prevent being greenwashers?
Yeah, certainly. I think the one thing that I noticed right away, and our first program was actually the Planet Pitch program that we have, which is about climate and sustainability learning for the storytellers, and all the folks that participated, and we could see the huge knowledge gap when they came in. So PRCA, for example, has set out these new greenwashing guidelines, and they are really a great start. But they actually cannot be understood by a majority of the professionals they're meant for.
Yep.
So just some examples. So the first principle says make science-backed statements. Communicators do not understand what are science-backed statements. What is the science around this? So and when we saw that firsthand. There's another thing, which mentions as best practice, and it says the communication of net zero or carbon neutral claims should be substantiated with clear communications on the methodology and accounting metrics used. With this whole sentence, in the greenwashing guidelines, starting with what is net zero, what is carbon neutral, what is the methodology, what are accounting metrics. None of this there's no awareness around this. So there's a great need for PRCA and other industry bodies to create really industry-wide learning programs, just around the greenwashing guidelines. That's a start. And advertising in the UK has started with something called as Ad Net Zero. That's looking at how the ad industry has how they can reduce emissions, and also working with their clients. So that should definitely be considered for across industries, and it should cover the basics of the science, and then what are, especially being very sector specific, because every sector, as I was mentioning, is quite unique, looking at energy or automotive or food or fashion. And I think that's what will really make that shift happen.
One of the things that we certainly talk to companies about a lot is starting with understanding what their stakeholders expect of them, and then communicating really clearly their intentions. What are they going to do? What are their commitments? And then, as you mentioned, their methodology and actually what they're going to do to reach those commitments. But an interesting area that we come across is, what do you do when you don't make the commitments? And we've certainly held that it's best practice for organisations to communicate their good results, but also communicate when they fall short of their goals and be transparent about that. Is that something that you've come across, and is that the advice that you give people as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think, the nature of climate is such that there's a lot of regulation coming in on companies having to, number one, assess their climate risk, and secondly, disclose their climate risk. So like in Singapore, it's becoming a mandatory, requirement for listed companies, and they'll also do it for every private company. And, India has a business responsibility and sustainability report, and several other countries have that. So, having looking at, if you're serious about the transition, having to assess those risks and, understanding where you stand. And, transparency will really go a long way, because there are things that work and things that don't work. This is a very imperfect transition and it's still evolving, so I think that will really be quite important.
Are there organizations that you've seen globally that you hold up as examples of companies that you think are doing a really good job? And there might be examples we should all look at to understand how they've done a good job of communicating their climate change position?
Yeah, they have been, several. I think before that, I just want to talk about what exactly is climate communications. By definition, it's about the science, it's about the impacts, and it's also about the solutions. So, good climate communications, can happen when a company first has a very science-based, very strategic, action plan, and is very systematically implementing it. So, it is not just about reducing emissions. And there's 17 sustainable development goals, and many sustainability reports, and sustainability journeys reference that. And there's one goal on climate action, but 12 of 17 SDGs are actually connected to climate action. So climate and sustainability are very closely connected, and sustainability communications is climate communication. So the companies that are doing this well, they follow the science. Many have science-based targets on emission reduction. They talk about solutions and action. They're very informative and educative in nature because the audiences may not always understand. They update progress, avoid dubious claims. That's also evolving. And most importantly, they speak human. So it's not just data and facts, and it's they're putting people at the center of the transition. So those are the things which I see in the good climate communicators. And for examples, I find Patagonia really, really unique, and it's an outlier. I think they've had a very strong planetary and stakeholder focus since inception. And what is remarkable is they are in a very high emission sector of clothing and fashion, which is considered as very difficult to decarbonize. So that's one. Then Unilever has been quite at the front in their climate action plan, and also in how they communicate. And it has been since the days of Paul Polman. In fact, his book Net Positive is a great read for business leaders. And the another option is another client with or company that I'm really admire is Mahindra Group in India, and they're doing great work both in their climate action plans and in how they communicate. And one example I just comes to mind is they recently announced something called as net zero homes. It is as much about the product as it's about educating customers about how buildings and cities connect to climate change. They're putting the people impact there, and how an individual would benefit being a part of it. So I think several good examples there.
I want to talk about something that is vexing to us, and that is, the role of communications people when we have clients who are in the oil and gas sector or in the fossil fuel sector, or may have a division or part of their company in that sector. There is one school of thought that the best way we can be part of the solution is not to work for organizations like that. And there's another school of thought which is, you need to work with those organizations because those organizations are going to be the organizations who are in a position to invest in renewables and invest in decarbonisation. This is a question that is widely discussed and debated in our industry. What are your views there?
So, yes, the controversy is raging around this, but, for consultancies, working with big oil, I think just have to understand what is their, real commitment to the transition. And over the past years, it's big oil has, had revenues of over 3.5 trillion, in the last 5 years. And this recent data by International Energy Agency has shown that, they spend just 2.5% of their total investment on clean energy, which is actually 1% of global investment in clean energy. So
Yeah.
there isn't really, a commitment to transition. And, oil and gas companies also do not have any pathway to science-based targets. So there's this initiative called Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is basically companies, setting up a transition to, reduce emissions. And there is no pathway for SBTI for oil and gas companies, so it is just not possible for them to decarbonize. But at the same time, it's coal, for example, it's a great need for developing countries. India cannot progress without coal. We have a need for this. And but now, on the other hand, the World Coal Association has just rebranded as the Global Alliance for Sustainable Coal. That is not, that doesn't help. It doesn't put the message across in the right way. So I think has to be definitely more due diligence. It's who consultancies work with.
Yeah, I think due diligence is probably a very good term. In the previous season of this podcast, I spoke to Sharon Jetlal, a former BBC business reporter, and her and I were talking about, greenwashing and how to avoid greenwashing. And I wanted the journalist's perspective. And she talked about due diligence from the point of view of making it the media's responsibility when they're reporting on these issues to do their research. She said research is the key. You've got to do your research on exactly what the company says it's doing, where it's spending its money, what the results are, and really getting behind it. So I think, that due diligence is a really, really good point. One of the things that we've looked at is, starting with making sure, what are the intentions of the leadership team? What are their values? Are we aligned? Sometimes it's very straightforward to see a company's direction and where it's going, but other times it's not so straightforward. And then we really, for ourselves, because, as a business, in the same way you can, we get to choose who we work for. We really want to understand, are they genuine in their commitments? And is there evidence that they're doing what they say they're doing? And is it reasonable, their commitments, and are they genuine? And then, we've taken the approach that if we can do our own due diligence and satisfy ourselves that organizations are making a real commitment and investing in change, then we do want to help them and be part of it. Because as you said, many of the underdeveloped markets that we're working in will need some of these forms of energy for some time to come. I think we should talk about COP28 for a minute. By the time this episode goes to air, COP28 will be about 2 months behind us. We're seeing lots of commentary and lots of stories coming out of COP28 at the moment. I saw a really great infographic that you would have liked, and it suggested that COP28 was more canapes than climate action and more drinks than decisions, with everyone dancing around the big elephant in the room being oil and gas. Rachna, I was wondering what your observations were of COP28.
So I think, it's first of all, whatever the controversies around it, I think it's amazing that a forum like this exists, So if the world did not have the COPs, and if we did not have the, the international treaty, and, we didn't have these 28 COPs, we would have gone to like 4 degrees of, temperature rise, So they're a great platform, to bring, countries around the world together, whatever may be the, issues, around getting everybody to agree. And it is not easy by any means, to have, hundreds of countries, come together and agree on a consensus, on decisions. So progress is happening, but it's not fast enough. And, I think that is the issue. The platform should exist and it should continue to evolve. And there's a lot of work that happens outside of COPs, so they are not the be all end all of, the climate fight. Countries have their own, action plans. Businesses are, working towards decarbonization. So that journey is continuing, and, it's just about making sure that, the process should not stop. It should just keep happening. The conversation should keep happening.
Well, coming back to climate ready leaders for a moment, I saw recently that the UNDP signed an MOU with the International Communications Consultancy Organization to tackle communications challenges around the climate crisis. And I thought of you because, you've said the climate crisis is a communications crisis and we need to communicate it. And I think the fact that the UNDP sees the importance of communications as part of the solution really underlines the work that you're doing. You've said often that climate change is one of the biggest business opportunities of all time. I thought I'd just ask you to sort of expand on that and explain why you see it as being one of the biggest opportunities of all time.
So, as I said, for the internet, it's like, talking to somebody about the internet 30 years ago and, telling them, look, there's this amazing thing and, it's going to define our lives, and we couldn't have imagined a leader, today who does not understand about the internet. There's the largest corporations today are built on the internet, and climate is doing something very similar to our world. The next big companies, and in fact, that's what, Larry Fink from BlackRock mentioned is, the next big unicorns and corporations will all be climate companies because, they're going to be addressing, those issues and, the solutions that will work there. So in terms of opportunities, it's just every sector that is under transformation. It's energy, it's food, it's transport. Transport is quite visible, and you can see a lot of conversation around electric, but it's the entire ecosystem that is, transforming. So, there's a lot of opportunities there. And, talking particularly from a consultancy or agency point of view, it's about what a climate communications brief looks like. It doesn't come with the words climate communications on it. It'll ask about a company signing a methane pledge, or a company working on electronic waste, or one that is promoting green data centers or sustainable sourcing. So to develop a very coherent communication strategy, you will need to know what all this is about, and once the knowledge is there, then you're able to identify how these sectors are moving, and it's where especially the money is flowing. So governments are going to be spending a lot of money on the low carbon transition, and businesses will follow that direction. So where's the shift happening? I think that will really help. So with corporates, it's about their sustainability journeys. That has to happen. It is inevitable. It's and a lot of internal comms, will be needed there to facilitate that, with stakeholders, with employees, with supply chains. Then also about, co-creating solutions with customers, So once you understand the nuances, you know what that means, for that particular sector. So for example, if food waste is, causing huge emissions and is a climate problem, then how can a food brand, engage with consumers and, help address it? So that will be an opportunity. There are a lot of multilaterals and large non-profits that are looking at various aspects of climate and sustainability. So it opens up a lot of partnership opportunities, and there are also a lot of new areas, lot of innovation happening. So climate tech, climate startups, there are huge range of them, they are coming up. So those are all areas, whether as a communicator, you're looking at and facilitating those journeys.
I mean, what you're essentially saying is that it's hard to imagine being a communications professional today and not having a greater level of awareness of what you're talking about, of issues around climate sustainability, the science behind it, how it's measured, what the methodology is, what's the impact, what the reporting arrangements are. It seems that increasingly in today's world, it will be impossible to be a communications person if you're not equipped with this knowledge and can't have these conversations.
Absolutely.
Rachna, before we wrap up our conversation, one of the things we like to do at the end of the conversation is leave with a parting thought for our listeners. What final word of advice or statement would you like to make about what you're doing, and what message would you like to leave with the listeners today?
I think one key message is, just start with the learning. It's we've totally missed the learning piece. Climate has just come into consciousness about 5-7 years ago. So anybody who's been in business for that time, we have never really learned about it. So I think that knowledge gap, must be addressed, and start with understanding, your company's climate risks and the sustainability journey, the company is on. So a sustainability report, if your company has one, read it and, understand that, and just raise the level of sustainability conversations, so bring outside consultants in, it's get your sustainability teams to lead that conversation in the company, so you know where the gaps are and what needs to be addressed, and really just set aside time for leadership and employee learning. Time we see is the biggest challenge. People want to do it, but in the end, it's just other pressing concerns which will intrude. So a lot of it boils down to also deciding that yes, it has to be done, and so that's where it will begin.
I love your statement that climate really just happened to us. I mean, I can't think of any conversations today where sustainability and climate-related issues aren't part of the mandate and the brief of what we're working on for our clients. Yet, 10 years ago, it wasn't something I was talking about. So you're right, climate did just happen to us. Rachna, it's been delightful to talk to you today. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope I get to see you on your travels or my travels sometime soon.
Thank you for having me, Kylie. Lovely talking to you, and hope to see you soon.
Greg, I love that discussion. Rachna was really clear that there are opportunities in being a climate-focused company. In fact, she said all the future unicorns will be climate-related businesses.
Yeah, that was great. She said in the future, climate issues and solutions will be bigger than the internet. I mean, that's a pretty lofty statement. It's a pretty powerful way of thinking about how to communicate with people, how we can help them understand that in terms of how climate will impact business going forward. We're just at the very beginning of it now. We're right at the start, like when Tim Berners-Lee created the first website back in 91, which is a pretty amazing way to think of it.
Yeah. And look, sometimes people still need convincing. And I love the way she kept talking about the opportunity for business, because so often this area is approached as a challenge. She said companies that demonstrate their climate readiness are more likely to attract and retain employees, satisfy customers, be great partners in supply chain, and also attract investment. So, I mean, I don't know any business that isn't focused on those areas.
Yeah, right. And she was a really nice positive voice. It's always nice to talk to someone who sees opportunity where so many see nothing but toil and trouble. She makes a good point again that everyone wants to help, like everyone is on board for this, but getting that help is just a matter of clearly communicating the actionable, practical solutions that a company can take, which will allow them to be ready for this future that's quickly approaching.
Sure. Thanks for listening, everyone. Make sure to check out the other episodes in our series. We've got great conversations with some of the brightest minds out there discussing the important issues in the world of social capital. See you next time.
Social Capital Matters has been a production of Baldwin Boyle Group, hosted by Kylie Taylor and produced and edited by Greg Jorgensen. Find more episodes in our ongoing series on baldwinboyle.com/podcasts, watch on YouTube, or listen wherever you find your podcasts.